The late afternoon sun hung low over Maple Ridge, washing the quiet little town in soft amber light. The sky stretched wide, streaked with gentle swirls of pink and orange, the kind of sunset you only saw in places like this. A town where time seemed to move slower, and everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. 9-year-old Lily Sanders skipped down the sidewalk, her sneakers tapping a cheerful rhythm against the worn concrete. A small brown paper bag dangled from her hand, the tops of a milk carton and a loaf of bread poking out. Her mother had sent her down to the corner store to grab a few things, something Lily did all the time. It made her feel grown up, responsible, and of course she wasn't alone. Trotting beside her with his ears perked and eyes sharp was Max, her ever-present shadow. Max wasn't just any dog, he was a German shepherd with a coat of black and tan, his every step purposeful, his attention constantly flicking between Lily and their surroundings. Once, Max had been a proud member of the Maple Ridge K-9 unit, partnered with none other than Deputy Chris Sanders, Lily's dad. But those days were behind him now. An injury had ended his service early, leaving him to trade police cruisers and training drills for naps on the front porch and neighborhood walks with Lily. Still, some instincts never faded. Even with his retirement, Max carried himself like he was still on duty. No squirrel, stray cat, or passing car escaped his attention. His loyalty to Lily was absolute, a bond forged not just from time, but from something deeper. The unspoken connection between a dog and the little girl who saw him as her best friend. As they made their way home, the streets were quiet. Too quiet. Most days the sidewalks would have a few neighbors out watering their plants or chatting over fences. But tonight there was only silence. Even the birds seemed muted, as though the town itself was holding its breath. Max's ears flicked, his head snapping toward the far end of the block. Lily followed his gaze and saw them, 3 motorcycles, their engines snarling low like wolves at dusk. They rumbled down the street, black leather jackets gleaming, chrome reflecting the fading light. The men riding them were strangers, not the kind of strangers who stopped to ask for directions, but the kind that made you instinctively cross the street. Lily's steps faltered, her fingers curling tighter around the paper bag. She wasn't sure why, but something about them made her stomach twist, like when you hear a grown-up shout and you know you're not supposed to be there. Max growled low in his throat, the sound barely audible but full of warning. His body shifted, placing himself between Lily and the road without missing a beat. To anyone watching, it might have looked like a dog being protective, but for those who knew Max's history it was clear the K-9 in him had woken up. The motorcycles slowed, engines idling as the riders turned their heads in Lily's direction. One of them, a man with a thick beard and a jagged scar cutting across his cheek, grinned wide, flashing teeth stained yellow. He leaned to the side, nudging the rider next to him with a gloved hand. "Easy pickings," Lily heard him say. The second man, taller and thinner, had a long snake tattoo winding up his arm and disappearing beneath his sleeve. His laugh was sharp, like metal scraping against metal. "Yeah, what's a kid like that doing all alone?" Lily took a step back, her heart thudding hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. Max stood his ground, his stance shifting lower, his muscles coiling beneath his fur like a loaded spring. The bearded man, Scar, kicked out the stand on his bike and swung his leg off. His boots crunched against the gravel, and Lily caught the glint of a heavy chain hanging from his belt. He took a step toward her, his smile wide and oily. "Evenin', sweetheart," he said, voice too sweet to be real. "You lost?" Lily shook her head, clutching the bag to her chest. "I'm just going home." "Home, huh?" Scar squinted down the street like he was trying to figure out which house might be hers. Maybe we'll walk you there. Make sure you get there safe." The other bikers chuckled, the sound rolling down the empty street like a warning. Max took a step forward, his growl deepening, teeth flashing white in the fading light. Scar's eyes flicked down to the dog. "Ain't he a fierce little thing?" he said, still smiling. But there was something colder in his tone now. "Please," Lily said quietly, her voice trembling despite her best effort to sound brave. "Leave us alone." "Ah, come on." Snake grinned, swinging a leg off his bike too. "We're just being friendly." Max barked once, sharp and commanding. The kind of bark that didn't belong to a family pet but to a working dog, a protector. The sound echoed off the buildings, bouncing down the street like a shot fired into the air. Scar's smile faltered, just for a second. "What's his deal?" he muttered. Snake sneered, "Just a mutt with a big mouth." Scar took another step closer, and Max's bark turned into a full snarl, his lips curling back to reveal sharp teeth, the fur along his spine standing up in rigid spikes. There was no mistaking the threat in his posture. "Move 1 inch closer and you'll regret it." The tension hung thick in the air, so heavy Lily could hardly breathe. The bikers might have thought they were scaring a little girl and her dog, but they didn't know Max. They didn't know he'd been trained for moments exactly like this, and they sure didn't know he was willing to do whatever it took to protect his girl. Scar's eyes narrowed, and for a split second, Lily thought he might step back. But then he reached out, too fast, snatching at the grocery bag in her hands. The motion was quick, but not quick enough. Max exploded forward. The German Shepherd launched himself between Lily and the biker, his teeth sinking into the man's wrist with bone-crushing force. Scar screamed, jerking backward as Max's grip held firm, his jaws locked tight. The other bikers shot to their feet, stunned, the sneers wiped clean off their faces. "Get the damn dog off me!" Scar howled, stumbling as Max's weight dragged him down. Snake grabbed the chain from his belt, the metal clinking loudly as he swung it wide, but Max was already moving. Letting go of Scar, the shepherd dodged left, teeth flashing again as he latched onto Snake's pant leg and yanked hard, sending the man sprawling backward into the gravel. Lily's heart pounded so loud she could barely hear anything else. But she didn't run. She couldn't. Her hands gripped to the scruff of Max's neck, holding on like he was the only anchor keeping her from floating away in the storm. The two bikers scrambled to their feet, disbelief plastered across their faces. "That ain't no regular dog," one of them hissed. "No," Scar muttered, cradling his bleeding wrist. "That's a cop dog." Max stood between Lily and the bikers, his stance unshaken, his eyes locked onto the threat in front of him. He wasn't just protecting her, he was ready for war. The air in Maple Ridge seemed to thicken as the two bikers glared down at Max, their cocky grins long gone. The third rider, still sitting astride his bike a few yards back, kept his helmet on. But even through the dark visor, Lily could feel his eyes drilling into her. Scar shook out his bleeding wrist, crimson droplets spattering the asphalt at his feet. His jaw clenched so tight, Lily could hear his teeth grinding. "That mutt's gonna regret that," he snarled. "Teach him some manners, Snake." The biker, with the coiled snake tattoo, Snake, apparently, took a slow step forward, his fingers curling around the length of thick steel chain hanging from his belt loop. The links clinked softly, a sinister sound that made Lily's stomach churn. Max didn't flinch. His body stayed low, shoulders squared, weight perfectly balanced on all fours, ready to launch again. Lily's knuckles turned white where they clutched the fabric of Max's collar. "Please," she whispered, her voice so small it was almost swallowed by the tense silence. "We didn't do anything." Snake smirked, the grin stretching tight over yellowed teeth. "That's the thing, sweetheart," he said, swinging the chain lazily at his side. "We're not here 'cause you did anything. We're here 'cause we can." The chain snapped forward, a blur of rusted metal whipping through the air, but Max was faster. He surged sideways, jaws latching onto the chain mid-swing, yanking it out of Snake's grip with a violent twist of his head. The chain clattered to the ground, and Max stepped forward, one massive paw pinning it beneath his weight. Snake stumbled back, eyes wide. "What the hell?" Scar didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, his other hand flashing out, fingers curling around Lily's wrist. "Enough of this," he barked. Lily yelped, her feet nearly leaving the ground as Scar's grip tightened. Max responded instantly, a blur of fur and muscle colliding with Scar's thigh, teeth sinking into the denim and flesh beneath. Scar roared, losing his grip on Lily as he staggered backward, swiping wildly at Max with his free hand. Max didn't let go. His growl reverberated through the empty street like distant thunder, his head shaking side to side, refusing to release Scar's leg, even as the man kicked at him with his other foot. Lily stumbled back against the brick wall of the corner store, tears prickling at the edges of her eyes. Her chest heaved with short, panicked breaths, but her gaze never left Max. Even terrified, she couldn't look away from her dog, her protector, holding his ground against men 3 times his size. The third biker, the one still on his bike, finally dismounted. He was shorter than the others, stockier, with a beard that barely covered his chin, and a tattered leather vest with the Iron Fangs logo stitched across the back. He didn't say anything as he approached, just pulled a folding knife from his pocket, the blade snapping open with a metallic click. Lily's heart slammed against her ribs. "No," she cried, "leave him alone." The biker ignored her. He stepped closer, knife raised, and for the first time, Max's growl shifted into something darker, a deep, rumbling snarl that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. The biker hesitated, sweat beading along his temple. Even he could feel it, that primal warning, the kind that meant if he took one more step, there would be no turning back. Scar grunted, finally wrenching his leg free from Max's grip. "Just gut the damn mutt," he shouted. "What are you waiting for?" The biker took that step. Max exploded. He didn't just lunge, he launched, teeth sinking into the man's forearm before the knife could come down. The force knocked the biker off balance, sending him sprawling onto his back with Max on top of him, jaws clamped tight around his wrist. The knife skittered across the pavement, spinning under a parked car. The man screamed, his free hand pounding uselessly against Max's side, but the dog didn't budge. His entire body was tense, muscles locked, trained instincts honed to protect, no matter the cost. From somewhere down the block a door banged open. "Get away from her." The voice was sharp, high-pitched with fear and fury all mixed together. Lily's head whipped around. Mrs. Ruby, the elderly owner of the corner store, stood on her front steps, her cordless phone clutched in one hand, the other trembling as it pointed toward the bikers. "I'm calling the sheriff," she shrilled. "You lay one more hand on that girl and you'll have the whole town on you." Scar snarled, wiping blood from his wrist onto his jeans. "Mind your damn business, lady." "It is my business," Ruby barked back. "That little girl's like my own granddaughter, and that dog's got more heart than all of you put together." Max's growl never stopped, a continuous warning that only grew louder when Scar took another step toward Lily. His lips curled back, exposing every sharp tooth, a predator ready to do whatever it took. The sound of sirens split the air. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Scar, Snake, and the third biker all turned their heads toward the approaching squad car. the red and blue lights bouncing off every window and surface in sight. "Cops," Snake spat. "Time to go," Scar growled. But Max didn't let go. The third biker screamed as Max's teeth held firm, even as his packmates bolted for their bikes. Scar and Snake revved their engines, the roar almost drowning out the approaching sirens, but not quite. "Max, let him go." Lily's voice was desperate, afraid Max wouldn't stop even when the danger was leaving. At the sound of her voice, Max released his grip, reluctantly, his body still vibrating with adrenaline, every muscle tense and ready to leap again. The biker scrambled to his feet, clutching his mangled arm as he stumbled after his friends. They didn't even look back. The squad car screeched to a halt at the end of the block, lights washing over the scene like daylight. The door flew open, and Deputy Chris Sanders vaulted out, his hand already reaching for his holstered gun. "Lily," his voice broke with panic and relief all at once. "Dad." Lily ran straight to him, throwing herself into his arms, the grocery bag long forgotten on the sidewalk. Max stayed right where he was, between Lily and the retreating motorcycles, ears still flat, teeth still bared. Even with Chris on scene, Max's focus didn't waver. Chris knelt, holding Lily tight, one hand smoothing her hair. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" "No," Lily whispered, her face pressed into his chest. "Max saved me." Chris's gaze lifted to the German Shepherd, his partner once upon a time, and still somehow, the protector he had always been. "Good boy, Max," Chris murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You're a damn good boy." Max finally relaxed, his tail wagging just once, as if to say, "That's my job." The squad car's flashing lights painted the narrow alleyway in streaks of red and blue, but even with the cavalry arriving, the air felt thick, like the storm hadn't passed yet, just paused. Lily stood frozen between her dad and Max, one tiny hand gripping Max's fur, the other clutching the sleeve of Deputy Chris Sanders' uniform. The bikers might have backed off for now, but the threat still hung heavy in the air like cigarette smoke in a dive bar. Chris kept his arm around Lily's shoulders as his partner, Officer Mark Delaney, stepped up beside him. "What the hell happened here?" Mark's voice was low, his eyes darting from the tire marks left by the fleeing bikes to the blood smeared across the asphalt. Chris shook his head. "I'm not sure yet." "Lily, honey, can you tell me what they said to you?" Lily's voice was a whisper, so soft Max's ear flicked toward her to catch it. "They said they wanted to take me." Her fingers twisted into Max's fur, knuckles white. "They thought I was alone." Chris's jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. His grip on his daughter tightened protectively. "They're not gonna lay a finger on you," he said firmly. "Not while I'm breathing." Max sat at Lily's side, posture rigid, eyes still locked on the far end of the alley where the bikers had disappeared. The dog's instincts were like a wire stretched to its limit, ready to snap at the first wrong move. Even retired, even after injury, Max was still every inch the K-9 officer he'd been trained to be. Just then, the glass door to the corner store swung open with a loud creak. Mrs. Ruby stepped out, her face pale, cordless phone still clutched in her hand. "I called as soon as I saw them surround her," she said, her voice shaking. "I knew those boys were trouble the second they rolled into town." Chris gave her a tight nod. "You did the right thing, Ruby. Thank you." Mrs. Ruby's gaze dropped to Max, her lips trembling into a weak smile. "That dog, if it wasn't for him—" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "Yeah," Chris murmured. "I know." Before anyone could say more, the distant rumble of engines echoed down the block again. Not gone after all. They were circling back, like vultures too stubborn to leave a fresh kill. Chris stood, his hand automatically resting on his holster. "Mark, take Lily and Ruby inside, now." "No." Lily's voice rose in panic, her grip on Max tightening. "I'm not leaving Max." Chris glanced down at Max, who stood tall, ears pricked forward, stance wide. The dog wasn't going anywhere, and Chris knew better than to fight him on it. "All right," he said quietly. "Stay behind me." The first bike reappeared at the mouth of the alley. Scar's unmistakable bulk visible even in the dimming light. Behind him, Snake and another biker Lily didn't recognize followed, their headlights cutting harsh beams through the shadows. They were down a man. The third, the one Max had torn up, was nowhere in sight. But they were still dangerous. Scar swung one leg off his bike, boots crunching on gravel as he took a step forward. "You made a big mistake, Sanders," he called out, voice dripping with venom. "You think a mutt and a badge are gonna stop us?" Chris drew his gun in a single, smooth motion, the metallic click echoing down the alley. "You take one more step toward my daughter," Chris said, voice cold and steady, "and you'll find out." Snake smirked, twirling his chain again. "Think you're fast enough to take all of us, deputy?" "You want to find out?" Mark growled from the doorway, one hand on his own weapon, the other shielding Mrs. Ruby and Lily inside. Scar's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see you soon, sweetheart," he called toward Lily. "Real soon." Lily's heart hammered against her ribs, but Max took a single step forward, placing himself directly between her and Scar. His lip curled back, baring his teeth in a silent promise. Scar met the dog's gaze, and for the briefest moment his confidence flickered. Without another word, Scar turned on his heel, climbed back onto his bike, and with a deafening roar, the gang peeled off into the night. The silence they left behind felt heavier than the noise. Chris lowered his gun but didn't holster it. He knelt beside Lily, cupping her face gently in his hand. "You okay, baby?" She nodded, but her eyes stayed on the alley's mouth where the bikers had disappeared. "They're coming back," she whispered. Chris pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Inside the store, the phone rang again. Mrs. Ruby scrambled to answer it, her voice low and hurried. Chris took Lily's hand, leading her toward the squad car. "We're going home," he said softly. "I'm not letting you out of my sight." Max trotted beside them, never letting his guard drop. The blood on his muzzle had dried, but his eyes still held that hard, determined glint. Whatever those bikers were planning, Max would be ready. The Sanders house sat at the edge of town, a modest, single-story home with a white picket fence and a swing set in the yard. Chris had chosen it because it felt safe, far enough from the main road, close enough to the neighbors. That sense of safety felt paper-thin now. Chris locked every door, every window, checked and rechecked the security system until even Mark muttered, "You're getting paranoid." "Maybe," Chris muttered, "but paranoid's how I keep her safe." Max paced the living room like a soldier on patrol, nose twitching at every sound. He finally settled at Lily's feet where she sat curled on the couch, her arms wrapped around her knees. She didn't say much, she didn't have to. Her fingers absently stroked Max's fur, grounding herself in the only thing that made her feel safe right now. Chris sank into the armchair across from her, his own fingers drumming a restless beat against his knee. "We'll get 'em," he promised softly. "I swear." Lily didn't answer. She just curled closer to Max, burying her face in his side. Max didn't move, didn't even blink, just stayed perfectly still, a living wall between her and the world. Outside, the night settled over Maple Ridge, cold and dark. Somewhere in the distance, a motorcycle engine growled low before fading into silence. But inside the Sanders home, Max's heart beat steady and strong, the quiet rhythm of a guardian who would never let his girl down. Not tonight. Not ever. The air in Maple Ridge felt heavier than usual, as if the entire town was holding its breath. Word traveled fast in places like this. By the time the sun rose the next morning, everyone from the grocery clerk to the mail carrier knew what had happened in the alley behind Ruby's store. The Iron Fangs had crossed a line, and Maple Ridge wasn't the kind of place that forgot. But for the Sanders family, there wasn't time to dwell on town gossip. Deputy Chris Sanders had been up most of the night, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His service weapon lay beside his badge, both within arm's reach. The phone had rung twice since midnight. First from Officer Mark, letting him know the department was working on identifying the gang's bikes, and the second from a concerned neighbor who'd spotted unfamiliar motorcycles circling the far end of Maple Ridge. They were watching and waiting. In the living room, Lily slept curled up on the couch with Max sprawled protectively across her legs. The little girl's hand rested on the dog's back, her fingers occasionally twitching in her sleep, as if reassuring herself he was still there. Max never slept deeply anymore. His ears twitched at every distant sound, his head lifting at the faintest creak of the floorboards. Chris stood in the doorway, watching them both. The weight in his chest was a mix of fear and fury. Fear that something could happen to Lily and fury that anyone would dare try. The knock at the door came just after 7 a.m., sharp and deliberate. Max was on his feet instantly, his low growl vibrating through the room before Chris even reached the door. He peeked it through the side window, relaxing only slightly when he saw Mark standing on the porch, his own expression grim. "Morning," Mark said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We got a hit on one of the plates from last night. They're registered out of Denver. Some of these guys have records as long as your arm. Assault, drug trafficking, extortion." "Figures," Chris muttered, running a hand through his hair. "They're not just here to pass through." "Nope." Mark's mouth tightened. "They're here for something or someone." Chris didn't respond, but both men's eyes drifted to Lily, still asleep with Max at her side. They didn't need to say it out loud. The bikers hadn't picked her at random. They'd been watching her, and that meant they'd be back. Just after lunch, Chris took Lily and Max for a drive around town. Partly to get her mind off things, but mostly so he could see for himself if anyone was tailing them. Max rode in the back seat, nose pressed to the window, his body tense like a coiled spring. Lily was quiet, her usual chatter replaced by a thoughtful silence as she stared out at the passing storefronts. "Daddy?" she asked softly. "Why did they want me?" Chris glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Sometimes bad people look for someone they think is easy to scare, someone who's alone. He offered a small smile. But they didn't know about Max. Lily's hand dropped onto Max's head, scratching gently behind his ears. "They're not going to come back, right?" Chris swallowed hard. "Not if we can help it, sweetheart." But the uneasy feeling in his gut said otherwise. The sun was starting to set when it happened. Chris was outside stacking firewood when the sound of motorcycles echoed down the street. His heart stopped for a beat, then kicked into overdrive. Max was already at the door, ears pricked forward, his entire body vibrating with tension. "Lily, get inside," Chris barked, his voice sharp with urgency. Lily froze on the porch steps, Max circling her like a bodyguard. The roar of engines grew louder, until 3 bikes came into view, rolling slowly down the street like predators sizing up their prey. Scar was in the lead, his leather jacket stretched tight across his shoulders, that wolf tattoo leering at them from his neck. Snake was right behind him, the heavy chain he loved to swing dangling loosely from his fist. Chris stepped off the porch, one hand resting on his holster. "You're not welcome here," he said, his voice low but carrying easily across the yard. Scar grinned, his teeth yellow and crooked. "We're just here for a friendly visit," he said, his voice slick as oil. "Wanted to check on the little princess, see if she still got that mutt watching her." Max's growl was low and dangerous, the fur along his back standing on end. "You don't want to do this," Chris warned, his fingers tightening around the grip of his gun. Scar's grin widened. "Oh, I think we do." Without warning, Scar gunned the engine, the bike lurching forward onto the front lawn. Lily screamed, but Max moved faster. In a blur of fur and muscle, the shepherd launched himself at Scar, jaws clamping down on the biker's leather-clad arm. Scar howled in pain, swerving wildly and crashing into the porch railing. Chris drew his weapon, shouting, "Freeze!" But Snake was already off his bike, chain swinging. Max didn't hesitate. He released a Scar and spun, intercepting Snake before the man could take another step toward Lily. The chain whipped through the air, but Max ducked under it, teeth sinking into Snake's leg. Scar staggered to his feet, pulling a knife from his boot. "I'll gut that mutt," he roared. Chris fired a warning shot into the ground. "Drop it." But Scar grabbed Lily, yanking her off the porch and dragging her toward his bike. Lily screamed, kicking and thrashing, but Scar's grip was like iron. "Call off the dog or she gets hurt," he shouted. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then Max moved. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing, just pure instinct and loyalty. Max launched himself at Scar with enough force to knock him clean off his feet, his jaws locking onto Scar's wrist. The knife clattered to the ground, and Scar screamed as Max dragged him away from Lily. Chris was there in an instant, pulling Lily into his arms while Mark and 2 other officers arrived, guns drawn. "Hands where I can see 'em," Mark shouted. Snake, bleeding from his leg, raised both hands shakily. Scar tried to fight, but Max pinned him to the ground, growling low in his throat until Chris gave the command to stand down. The fight was over. Lily sobbed into Chris's chest, her tiny hands clutching his shirt. "He saved me again, Daddy," she whispered. Chris knelt, wrapping one arm around his daughter and the other around Max's neck. "Yeah, baby," he said softly. He sure did. Max leaned into them both, tail wagging slightly despite the tension in his muscles. The danger was over, for now. But there wasn't a single doubt in anyone's mind, not Chris, not Lily, not anyone in Maple Ridge. Max wasn't just a dog, he was family. He was a guardian. And no one, not Scar, not Snake, not anyone, would ever get past him. The next morning, Maple Ridge woke up to something it hadn't seen in years. A sense of pride wrapped in relief. The Iron Fangs had been rounded up, hauled out of town in the back of police cruisers with their hands zip-tied and their egos bruised. News spread faster than wildfire. From Ruby's store to the diner on Main Street, to the post office where Mrs. Callahan sorted letters with one ear tuned to the latest gossip. But for the Sanders family, it wasn't just a story, it was personal. Lily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, still wearing her pajamas with little pink stars on them, one hand resting gently on Max's side. The big shepherd lay stretched out beside her, his head resting on her knee, his eyes half closed, but his ears still tuned to every sound around them. His left shoulder was wrapped in a bandage, a souvenir from the night before when Scar's knife had grazed him. A minor wound, but enough to make Lily hover over him like a nurse in training. "Does it hurt, buddy?" she asked softly, her fingers tracing over the fur near the bandage. Max's tail thumped once, twice against the rug, as if to say, "I've had worse." Chris leaned against the doorframe, watching them from a distance. There were moments in life, small, quiet moments, where everything seemed to click into place, and this was one of them. His little girl, safe. His old partner, lying beside her, still standing guard like the warrior he'd always been. The knock on the front door startled them both, but Max's head snapped up first. His deep chest rumble filled the air before Chris could even react. "Easy, boy," Chris muttered, moving to the door. "It's just Mark." Sure enough, Officer Mark stood on the porch, holding a crumpled piece of paper in one hand and a large bag in the other. "Morning," Mark said with a crooked grin. "Hope you're ready for this." Chris raised an eyebrow. "Ready for what?" Mark stepped inside, dropping the bag on the kitchen table. "The mayor's office called first thing. They're planning a ceremony. Town council voted unanimously. They want to honor Max." Chris chuckled under his breath. "Honor him, huh? Hope they're not expecting him to make a speech." "Wouldn't put it past him," Mark smirked. "You should see Ruby. She's been telling everyone how Max single-handedly, or single-podly, saved the whole town." "Sounds about right." Chris shook his head, half amused, half proud. Lily's eyes lit up from the living room. "A ceremony for Max?" "That's right, kiddo," Mark called over. "They're calling it a Hero's Day. All for your brave pup." Lily scrambled to her feet, her excitement bubbling over. "He needs a medal," she declared. "And a cape. Can dogs wear capes?" Chris laughed. "Let's stick with a collar for now." But Lily was already planning something, her brow furrowed in that serious way kids get when they're absolutely determined. She disappeared into her room without another word. The ceremony was set for Saturday afternoon at the town square, the same spot where the annual Christmas tree lighting and 4th of July parade always took place. The whole town turned out, from the retirees who gathered for coffee at the diner every morning, to the high school football team still riding the high of last season's championship win. A small stage had been set up under the old oak tree, its branches still bare from winter. The mayor stood behind a wooden podium, shuffling papers nervously, clearly unused to giving speeches outside of budget meetings. Lily stood front and center wearing her best dress, white with little blue flowers, and gripping a homemade flower garland she'd spent the entire morning making. Max sat beside her, his fur brushed to a glossy shine, his bandage barely visible beneath the thick coat. When the mayor finally called Max's name, the crowd erupted into applause. But Max just sat there, stoic as ever, as if the whole thing was beneath him. His focus stayed on Lily, like always. "Today," the mayor said, clearing his throat, "we honor a true hero, a guardian of Maple Ridge, a dog who reminded all of us what courage, loyalty, and love look like." Lily stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she draped the garland over Max's neck. "You're my hero," she whispered, her voice so soft only Max could hear it. He responded the only way he knew how, with a gentle lick across her cheek, drawing giggles from the crowd. The applause was deafening, but Max never flinched. He was trained for chaos, but today there was no danger, just love, admiration, and a town that finally understood what the Sanders family had known all along. He wasn't just a dog, he was family. Later that night, after the excitement had died down and the house was quiet again, Chris sat on the porch with a cold beer in hand. Lily sat beside him, her legs swinging off the edge. Max stretched out at their feet, head resting on his paws. The stars were out, clear and bright against the dark sky. A rare kind of peace settled over the house, the kind that comes when the danger's past. But the weight of what could have happened still lingers. "Dad?" Lily's voice broke the silence. "Yeah, sweetheart." Are they gonna come back? Those bikers? Chris took a slow sip of his beer, choosing his words carefully. Not if I have anything to say about it. Lily leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm glad Max is here. Me too, Chris said softly, his hand dropping onto Max's back. Me too. Max let out a low, contented sigh, his tail sweeping across the wood with lazy strokes. The fight was over, the family safe, and for the first time in a long time, the Sanders family knew they weren't alone. Because with Max at their side, they never would be. The next morning, Chris sat at his desk at the sheriff's station, flipping through a proposal Officer Mark had slid across the table. At the top, bold letters read, Maple Ridge K-9 Unit Proposal. Beneath it, in smaller handwriting, was a note. Let's make Max the first of many. Chris smiled to himself, signing his name at the bottom without hesitation. Because if Max had taught him anything, it was this. There's no such thing as just a dog. Not in Maple Ridge, not in the Sanders family, and certainly not for Lily.